Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Shri Hari Ram Sankirtan Ki Shri Hari Ram Mantra Ki Shri Hari Ram Prabhu Ki Gaura Premanande Nitai Gaura Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitai Gaura Hari Bo We welcome this morning Devaki Pran Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Come on, it's Devaki Pran. My old friend and constant inspiration. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome back to the live studios here in Govardhan, ISKCON Bhaktivedanta Ashram, where the reading of Srimad Bhagavatam has become our life and soul. Sanatana Goswami wrote a beautiful glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's our habit to recite it before we read Srimad Bhagavatam. This is Srimad Bhagavatam Mahima Stotram from the Sri Krishna Lila Stava by Sanatana Goswami. It goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drikprada, O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabhu Kali Dvandoditaditya Shri Krishna Parivartita, O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master, Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadayate Sarvada Savasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Shri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguru Mad Mahadana Manistadaga Madbhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu saduta dayin artini chuchatakara hanamuncha gadachin mam premna ret katayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We've reached the 14th chapter of the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Ideal Family Life. Text 1. Maharaj Yudhishthira inquired from Narada Muni, O my Lord, O great sage, kindly explain how we who are staying at home without knowledge of the goal of life may also easily attain liberation according to the instructions of the Vedas. Purport. In the previous chapters, the great sage Narada has explained how a brahmachari, a vanaprastha, and sannyasi, a vanaprastha and a sannyasi should act. He first explained the dealings of a brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyasi, because these three ashramas, or statuses of life, are extremely important for fulfillment of the goal of life. One should note that in the brahmacharya ashram, vanaprastha ashram, and sannyasa ashram, there is no scope for sex life. whereas sex life is allowed in Grihastha life under regulations. Narada Muni therefore first described brahmacharya, vanaprastha, and sannyas because he wanted to stress that sex is not at all necessary, although one who absolutely requires it is allowed to enter grihastha life or household life, which is also regulated by the Shastras and Guru. Yudhishthira Maharaj could understand all this. Therefore, as a grihastha, he presented himself as Griha Mudha Dihi, one who is completely ignorant of the goal of life. A person who remains a householder in family life is certainly ignorant of life's goal. He is not very much advanced in intelligence. As soon as possible, one should give up his so-called comfortable life at home and prepare to undergo austerity or tapasya, tapodivyam, putrika. According to the instructions given by Rishabhadev to his sons, we should not create a so-called comfortable situation, but must be prepared to undergo austerity. This is how a human being should actually live to fulfill life's ultimate goal. Text 2. Narada Muni replied, "My dear king, those who stay at home as householders must act to earn their livelihood, and instead of trying to enjoy the results of their work themselves, they should offer these results to Krishna, Vasudeva. How to satisfy Vasudeva in this life can be perfectly understood through the association of great devotees of the Lord." Purport. The format of Grihastha life should be dedication to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita it is said, "Anashrita karma palam karyam karma karotiya sasanyasi suyogi cha nagniranir nachakriyaha." One who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life, and he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no work. Whether one acts as a brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi, he must act only for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. This should be the principle for everyone's life. Narada Muni has already described the principles of life for a brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyasi, and now he is describing how a grahastha should live. The basic principle is to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The science of satisfying the Supreme Lord can be learned as described here. Sakshad upasita mahamunim. The word mahamunim refers to great saintly persons or devotees. Saintly persons are generally known as munis or thoughtful philosophers concerned with transcendental subject matters. And mahamunim refers to those who have not only thoroughly studied the goal of life, but who are actually engaged in satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. These persons are known as devotees. Unless one associates with devotees, one cannot learn the science of Vasudevarpana, or dedicating one's life to Vasudeva, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In India, the principles of this science were followed strictly. Even 50 years ago, I saw that in the villages of Bengal and the suburbs of Calcutta, people engaged in hearing Srimad Bhagavatam daily when all their activities ended, or at least in the evening before going to bed. Everyone would hear the Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam classes were held in every village, and thus people had the advantage of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, which describes everything about the aim of life, liberation or salvation. This will be clearly explained in the next verses. Text 3 and 4. A grihastha must associate again and again with saintly persons, and with great respect he must hear the nectar of the activities of the Supreme Lord and his incarnations, as these activities are described in Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. Thus one should gradually become detached from affection for his wife and children, exactly like a man awakening from a dream. Purport. The Krishna consciousness movement has been established to give grahastas all over the world an opportunity to hear Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita specifically. The process, as described in many ways, is one of hearing and chanting Shinvatam Sakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana. Everyone, especially the grahastas, who are mudhadi, ignorant about the goal of life, should be given opportunities to hear about Krishna. Simply by hearing, by attending lectures in the different centers of the Krishna consciousness movement, where topics of Krishna from Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam are discussed, they will be purified of their sinful inclination for constant indulgence in illicit sex, meat-eating, intoxication, and gambling, which have all become prominent in modern days. Thus they can be raised to the status of light, Punya Shavana Kirtana, simply by joining the kirtan. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And by hearing about Krishna from Bhagavad Gita, one must be purified, especially if he also takes prasad. This is all going on in the Krishna consciousness movement. Another specific description here is Srimad Bhagavato Bhikshnam Avatara Kritamritam. It is not that because one has once finished Bhagavad Gita, he should not hear it again. Sounds familiar. The word abhikshnam is very important. We should hear again and again. There is no question of stopping. Even if one has read these topics many times, he should go on reading again and again, because Bhagavat Katha, the words spoken by Krishna and spoken by Krishna's devotees about Krishna, are amritam, nectar. The more one drinks this amritam, the more he advances in his eternal life. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Sri Bhagavad Gita ki jai. The human form of life is meant for liberation, but unfortunately, due to the influence of Kali Yuga, every day the grahastas are working hard like asses. Early in the morning they rise and travel even 100 miles away to earn bread. Especially in the Western countries, I have seen that people awaken at 5 o'clock to go to offices and factories to earn their livelihood. People in Calcutta, in Bombay, also do this every day. They work very hard in the office or factory, and again they spend 3 or 4 hours in transportation, returning home. Then they retire at 10 o'clock, and again rise early in the morning to go to their offices and factories. This kind of hard labor is described in the Shastras as the life of pigs and stool eaters. Nayam deho deha bhajam niloke kashtan kamam arhati bid bhujam ye. Of all living entities who have accepted material bodies in this world, one who has been awarded this human form should not work hard day and night simply for sense gratification, which is available even for the dogs and hogs that eat stool. One must find some time for hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. This is Vedic culture. One should work 8 hours at the most to earn his livelihood, and either in the afternoon or in the evening, a householder should associate with devotees to hear about the incarnations of Krishna and his activities, and thus be gradually liberated from the clutches of Maya. However, instead of finding time to hear about Krishna, the householders, after working hard in offices and factories, find time to go to a restaurant or a club, where instead of hearing about Krishna and his activities, they are very much pleased to hear about the political activities of demons and non-devotees, and to enjoy sex, wine, women, and meat, and in this way waste their time. This is not grahastha life, but demoniac life. The Krishna consciousness movement, however, with its centers all over the world, give such fallen and condemned persons an opportunity to hear about Krishna. In a dream, we form a society of friendship and love, and when we awaken, we see that it has ceased to exist. Similarly, one's gross society, family, and love are also a dream, and this dream will be over as soon as one dies. Therefore, whether one is dreaming in a subtle way or in a gross way, these dreams are all false and temporary. One's real business is to understand that one is soul, aham brahmasmi, and that his activities should therefore be different. Then one can be happy. Brahmabhutak prasanatma nachochati nakankshati sarvashi bhuteshu madbhaktim labate param. One who is transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward all living entities. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. One who is engaged in devotional service can very easily be liberated from the dream of materialistic life. What a purport. Hare Krishna. Text 5. While working to earn his livelihood as much as necessary to maintain body and soul together, one who is actually learned should live in human society unattached to family affairs, although externally appearing very much attached. Purport. This is the picture of ideal family life. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked Ramananda Roy about the goal of life, Ramananda Roy described it in different ways, according to the recommendations of the revealed scriptures. And finally, Sri Ramananda Roy explained that one may stay in his own position, whether as a brahmana, a shudra, a sannyasi, or whatever, but one must try to inquire about life's goal. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. This is the proper utilization of the human form of life. When one misuses the gift of the human form by unnecessarily indulging in the animal propensities of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, and does not try to get out of the clutches of Maya, which subjects one to repeated birth, death, old age, and disease, one is again punished by being forced to descend to the lower species and undergo evolution according to the laws of nature. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. Being completely under the grip of material nature, the living entity must evolve again from the lower species to the higher species, unless he at last turns to the human form, until he at last returns to human life and gets the chance to be freed from the material clutches. A wise man, however, learns from the Shastras and Guru that we living entities are all eternal, but are put into troublesome conditions because of associating with different modes under the laws of material nature. He therefore concludes that in the human form of life, he should not endeavor for unnecessary necessities, but should live a very simple life, just maintaining body and soul together. Certainly, one requires some means of livelihood, and according to one's varna and ashrama, this means of livelihood is prescribed in the Shastras. One should be satisfied with this. Therefore, instead of hankering for more and more money, a sincere devotee of the Lord tries to invent some ways to earn his livelihood, and when he does so, Krishna helps him. Earning one's livelihood, therefore, is not a problem. The real problem is how to get free from the bondage of birth, death, and old age. Attaining this freedom and not inventing unnecessary necessities is the basic principle of Vedic civilization. One should be satisfied with whatever means of life comes automatically. The modern materialistic civilization is just the opposite of the ideal civilization. Every day, the so-called leaders of modern society invent something contributing to a cumbersome way of life that implicates people more and more in the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. These are classics.
Those are nice purples.
Huh?
Those are some nice purples.
Oh, classic. Vintage, Prabhupada.
One phrase that I've always appreciated is unnecessary necessities.
Yes.
That's a definite Prabhupada-ism.
Yeah.
It's a very poetical turn of phrase, unnecessary necessities. And then also this point about making a livelihood, one should just invent some way. I mean, it's not such a huge deal these days because everything's so complicated. You have to invent some way. Our Gopal's the king of that. One way or the other, find some stuff and make it happen. Yeah. And also, I was thinking about the verse in the Bhagavad Gita 14th chapter where Krishna says, Jaganya guna vrittista. And this Jaganya is described as the abominable mode of ignorance. And although we hear it maybe twice, 3 times, 5 times a day about hogs and dogs, the pigs who eat stool, and that's the standard of much of modern human civilization, is this. It kind of struck me this time how it is that a living entity who's part and parcel of Krishna can put himself in such a situation that he becomes dragged down into the abominable mode of ignorance. So much so that he takes it that eating stool is not just a necessity but a pleasure. It's quite remarkable the depths to which one can sink if one lets oneself go without the practice of devotional service. Any other thoughts from the... Yes? Mike?
I liked when it said, one must find some time for hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. This is Vedic culture. Because there's a lot of people who like to say, well, what is Vedic culture really? And, you know, it's kind of like there's different opinions, but Prabhupada just really simplifies it here, and I like that definition.
That's the essence. In fact, he backs it up with this verse from the Bhagavatam 10th canto that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu approved of from Ramananda Roy, Jnani priyasam vidapasya namanta eva jivanti sanmukaridam bhavadiya vartam stani stita shuti gatam manovir ayaso jita dito pyasitais trilokyam. If you just stay in your position, give up all kinds of speculation trying to understand God. Stay in your position and regularly hear. And from that, Krishna will give himself to you. He becomes conquered by the love that one develops from hearing about him. That's a nice point. What is Vedic culture? It's organizing your life around the principle of hearing and chanting. In fact, Rupa Goswami said that in the Upadeshamrita, says that in the Upadeshamrita, Tannama Rupa Charitari Sikirtananu Smrityo Karmena Rasana Manasin Yoja Tishtan Vraje Tananaragijananagami Kalam Nayeda Itupadesha Sadam. That the essence of all advice is that one should organize one's life around this principle of hearing constantly. And the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu says that constant for neophyte means at least once a day. It has to be done at least once a day. If you skip a day, you're in trouble. Like Joshua Hevitz, the famous violinist. He said, if I don't practice one day, I notice it. If I don't practice 2 days, my teacher notices it. If I don't practice 3 days, then everybody notices it. All my critics and the rest of the population of the world. Yes, Prabhu.
I like how Srila Prabhupada was remembering how 50 years before the writing of this, in the suburbs of Kolkata, people used to regularly hear Bhagavatam every day after work. That was just the culture. So that really painted that picture of, as we talked about, what Vedic culture is.
Yeah.
And it gives me hope because that's not that long ago. That was less than 100 years ago from now.
Yeah, and even in some places, it's still going on. I was just in Japan before I came here, and I went up to Ananta's house, and Ananta Gauranga, and the people that lived next to him in the apartment next to him, they're from South India. When I walk by, there's no furniture in there, of course, because they're Indians, they don't keep furniture. But they're all sitting on the floor. There's some in the living room, some in the bedroom. The door was kind of open a little bit because it was warm. And when I walked by, they were all chanting Vishnu Sahasranam. You know, the whole house was alive with the vibration. And, you know, I looked in there, and they're absorbed. They're in samadhi. You know, it's an electrical current, you know, that's going through the whole household, connecting them. I was just thinking that's the Vedic culture. Everybody comes together, and then they do it so regularly, they have a taste for it, and that's what sustains them. Devaki?
When I came first time to Vrindavan, 83, in Radhakund and Govardhan Parikrama, there are not much crowd. But in Radhakund, I used to see this Babajis. There are not so much crowd, but small kutiyas. And they used to chant all these prarthanas and Bhagavad Gita stutis, you know. Now that culture is lost. The culture was very prevalent in Radha. Even Brajvasis, they used to recite Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana, Chaupadis. Like Chaitanya Charitamrita have Payar in Bengali. So similarly, Ramayana, they are called Chaupadis. So they used to recite this, very by-hearted there. Now also many Brajvasis, they just recite this. This was a Vedic culture. But now the modern culture, they came TV especially, and they spoiled Indians, especially Indians.
Yeah.
There was a great sadhu in here, Govardhan Maharaj and Asif Krishna, they knows them. His name was Pandit Gayaprashadji Maharaj. He was just in Lakshminarayan Mandir. So he told me in 94, sorry. He told me, if you are going to Bhiksha, Madhukari, you should not go to the house where there is a Kali Yuga Jhanda. The Kali Yuga flag means antenna.
That's
Kali
the
Yuga
flag.
flag means antenna. India nowadays, the TV become a spoiled the whole culture.
Yeah.
So the
I used to go to Radha Damodar temple a lot, and there was a is there a devotee here? Oh, is that Priti Sandarbha? Okay, set up chairs for them. Make sure they're comfortable. When I used to go to Radha Damodar, there was a old bhakta. I don't know. He must have been in his 60s or something. And every day he would sit next to one of the samadhis by himself in the corner, and he'd just recite the whole Bhagavad Gita whenever I come by there. And I know once I stopped to lean in and kind of listen to what he was saying, he looked up like, "Get out of here." He wasn't doing it to show off or anything. It's like he had his bhav going, you know, he didn't want to be bothered. And it was really nice. Okay. More devotees. Hare Krishna Priti Sandarbha, please come find a seat. Are there enough chairs there? Okay. Welcome. Hare Krishna. So, other reflections, because we lost Maharaj somehow or other. I marked here this point, text number 5. While working to earn his livelihood as much as necessary to maintain body and soul together, one who is actually learned should live in human society unattached to family affairs, although externally appearing very much attached. It's an important instruction for grihastas, because sometimes grihastas think, I'm embarrassed to be a grihasta, let me be a sannyasi. And then they live in the grihastha ashram, but then they treat all their family members like, you know, who are you? You know, I don't need you. I'm detached. And that tortures everybody. Of course, it could come from any of the family members, but especially from the husband. You know, there has, even if there's a sense of deep detachment within, the family members require that there's a bond and a show of affection. Otherwise, mentally they'll be tortured, and they also won't develop at all. So it's such a practical point that the Bhagavatam makes here. Yes, Giridhari.
Reflection and possibly question also, just about like maintaining the body and just reflecting sometimes living as a brahmachari in the temple. There's the tendency is that like basically to do service because you have to maintain your body, almost like the same mentality of like a job. It can become like that, and I'm just thinking like what would be better to like, because sometimes then you feel stifled in that position where you're always just doing things because you have to maintain the temple as the brahmachari in the temple, but basically I think it might be a little more peaceful for myself or for more individuals to find some like simple way to just make a living where it's consistent, but you still have time to engage in service.
Yeah, that has to be taken on an individual case. Brahmachari life means to be joyful. Brahmachari life means to be happy all the time, that you feel unencumbered. It's almost like instant Brahmabhuta Prasannatma, because you have no other obligation except to serve. And you wake up in the morning and there's a whole day of service ahead of you. And it's the greatest of privileges to be able to sit with your colleagues who have no other agenda in life except to serve and have prasadam and eat something simple. You're not obligated to eat fancy things or with just what Krishna left for you. And you can serve all day long and nobody can stop you. In other situations in life, even if you're some big shot, people will be at you all day long, do this, do that, you got to answer these questions. But a brahmachari is it's an ideal situation of life because you can just be anonymous and serve all day long with no problem. And if you don't feel like that, then there are other situation slots you can fit into where you can feel naturally engaged. And that's the beauty of the varnashrama system. There's accommodation for everybody, every kind of psychological situation one might pass through in one's life, psychological situations, so that you can be accommodated, so that you can go on and doing your service. And if you can string together a lifetime of services rendered, and it doesn't matter what ashram, and just dedicate your life, then there's something that happens that's transformational, because your whole being after some time becomes transformed, and you can see it in Vaishnavas who dedicate their whole lives to it. Their whole life becomes that. Body, mind, spirit, everything. So now that Maharaj is back, I'm going to continue. Are you okay out there? Okay, Hare Krishna. All right, thank you. Where am I? Text 6. Do you want me to continue?
No, just a second.
Yeah, I know that.
Oh, you know it?
Yeah. I know, why wouldn't I know that? 6. An intelligent man in human society should make his own program of activities very simple. If there are suggestions from his friends, children, parents, brothers, or anyone else, he should externally agree, saying, "Yes, that is all right." But internally he should be determined not to create a cumbersome life in which the purpose of life will not be fulfilled. 7. The natural products created by the Supreme Personality of Godhead should be utilized to maintain the bodies and souls of all living entities. The necessities of life are of 3 types. Those produced from the sky, from rainfall, from the earth, from the mines, the seas, or the fields, and from the atmosphere, that which is obtained suddenly and unexpectedly. Purport: we living entities in different forms are all children of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As confirmed by the Lord in the Bhagavad Gita 14.4, Sarva yoni shukaunteya murtaya sambhavantiya tasam brahma mahad yonir aham bija pradapita. It should be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving Father. The Supreme Lord, Krishna, is the Father of all living entities in different species and forms. One who is intelligent can see that all living entities in the 8,400,000 bodily forms are part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and are His sons. Everything within the material and spiritual worlds is the property of the Supreme Lord. Ishavasyam midang sarvam, and therefore everything has a relationship with Him. Srila Rupa Goswami says in this regard, Prapanchikataya bhutya harisambhantimbastuna mumukshabhi parityago vairagyam palkukatyate. One who rejects anything without knowledge of its relationship to Krishna is incomplete in his renunciation. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Although Mayavadi philosophers say that the material creation is false, actually it is not false, it is factual. But the idea that everything belongs to human society is false. Everything belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for everything is created by Him. All living entities, being the Lord's sons, His eternal parts and parcels, have the right to use their Father's property by nature's arrangement. As stated in the Upanishads, Tena Taktena Bunjita Magradha Kasisuddhanam. Everyone should be satisfied with the things allotted him by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No one should encroach upon another's rights or property. In Bhagavad Gita it is said, Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhavaha jagnad bhavati parjanyo jagnad karma samud bhavaha. All living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. When food grains are sufficiently produced, both animals and human beings can be nourished without difficulty for their maintenance. This is nature's arrangement. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. Everyone is acting under the influence of material nature, and only fools think they can improve upon what God has created. The householders are especially responsible for seeing that the householders are specifically responsible for seeing that the laws of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are maintained without fighting between men, communities, societies, or nations. Human society should properly utilize the gifts of God, especially the food grains that grow because of rain falling from the sky. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Jagnad Bhavati Parjanya. So that rainfall will be regulated, humanity should perform yajnas, sacrifices. Yajnas were previously performed with offerings of oblations of ghee and food grains. But in this age, of course, this is no longer possible, for the production of ghee and food grains has diminished because of the sinful life of human society. However, people should take to Krishna consciousness and chant the Hare Krishna mantra as recommended in the Shastras. Yagnai Sankirtana Prayar Yajantihi Sumedasaha. If people throughout the world take to the Krishna consciousness movement and chant the easy sound vibration of the transcendental name and fame of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there will be no scarcity of rainfall. Consequently, food grains, fruits, and flowers will be properly produced, and all the necessities of life will be easily obtained. Grahastas, or householders, should take the responsibility for organizing such natural production. It is therefore said, Tasyai vaheto prayate tako vido. An intelligent person should try to spread Krishna consciousness through the chanting of the holy name of the Lord, and all the necessities of life will automatically follow. Haribol, Haribol. Text number 8. One may claim proprietorship to as much wealth as required to maintain body and soul together. But one who desires proprietorship over more than that must be considered a thief, and he deserves to be punished by the laws of nature. Okay, Maharaj, I give up. What? Tell what was funny. The Haribol, Haribol. If you take more than your quota, then you're a thief. Purport: by God's favor, we sometimes get large quantities of food grains or suddenly receive some contribution or unexpected profit in business. In this way, we may get more money than needed. So, how should that be spent? There is no need to accumulate money in the bank merely to increase one's bank balance. Such a mentality is described in Bhagavad Gita as asuric, demoniac. Idam adya maya labdam imam prapse manoratam idam astidam api me bhavishyati punardanam. The demoniac person thinks, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more. The asura is concerned with how much wealth he has in the bank today and how it will increase tomorrow, but unrestricted accumulation of wealth is not permitted either by the Shastra or in the modern age by the government. Actually, if one has more than one requires for his necessities, the extra money should be spent for Krishna. According to the Vedic civilization, it should all be given to the Krishna consciousness movement, as ordered by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita 9:27. Yakaroshi yadashnashi yatjohoshi dadasi yat yatapasyasi kaunteya tatkurishra mararparam. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all the austerities that you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. Grahastas should spend extra money only for the Krishna consciousness movement. The Grahastas should give contributions for constructing temples of the Supreme Lord and for preaching of Srimad Bhagavatam or Krishna consciousness all over the world. Bhagavad Gita. The Grahastas should give contributions for constructing temples of the Supreme Lord and for preaching of Srimad Bhagavad Gita or Krishna consciousness all over the world. Shrinvan Bhagavato Bhikshnam Avatara Katamritam. Avatar Katar. In the Shastras, the Puranas, and other Vedic literatures, there are so many narrations describing the transcendental activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and everyone should hear them again and again. For example, even if we read the entire Bhagavad Gita every day, all 18 chapters, in each reading we shall find a new explanation. That is the nature of transcendental literature. The Krishna consciousness movement therefore affords one an opportunity to spend his extra earnings for the benefit of all human society by expanding Krishna consciousness. In India especially, we see hundreds and thousands of temples that were constructed by the wealthy men of society who did not want to be called thieves and be punished. Shall we read this when we do our fundraiser in Baltimore? This verse is very important. As stated here, one who accumulates more money than needed is a thief, and by the laws of nature he will be punished. Hare Krishna Devaki Prabhu. So nice to see you. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande Haribo. One who acquires more money than necessary becomes desirous of enjoying material comforts more and more. Materialists are inventing so many artificial necessities, and those who have money, being allured by such artificial necessities, try to accumulate money to possess more and more. This is the idea of modern economic development. Everyone is engaged in earning money, and the money is kept in the bank, which then offers money to the public. In this cycle of activities, everyone is engaged in getting more and more money. And therefore, the ideal goal of human life is being lost. Concisely, it may be said that everyone is a thief and is liable to be punished. Punishment by the laws of nature takes place in the cycle of birth and death. No one dies fully satisfied by the fulfillment of material desires, for that is not possible. Therefore, at the time of one's death, one is very sorry, being unable to fulfill his desires. By the laws of nature, one is then offered another body to fulfill his unsatisfied desires. And upon taking birth again, accepting another material body, one voluntarily accepts the threefold miseries of life. All right, I'll take it.
Can you put this verse into a little bit of context, because this is a summary of Varnashram, but in passing one could look at this verse and it says, one may claim proprietorship to as much wealth as required to maintain body and soul together, and then anything over and above that makes you a thief. One could look at that statement and say, well, why is someone wearing a watch? Why does somebody have, this, that? And one could be very critical and say, well, this is above and beyond what you need to keep body and soul together, so therefore you're a thief. And on the strength of this verse, of course, it doesn't work that way, and that's not appropriate, because persons have different mental constitutions, and one has to have a certain living space and so forth. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Can you help me understand how to put this in a greater context of what is actually?
Well, what's wrong with wearing a watch? I mean, people have to know time, You don't have to wear, $1 billion watch, or maybe sometimes you do. I brought that up last year when Dhanadhar Maharaj talked about, wearing a 100 rupee watch. First of all, they break every month, right when you need them. And second of all, then I remember years ago when we were trying to make an impression on people in the airports that we weren't just little punks. So we wore nicer clothes and nicer watches because it was utilitarian. And when we did it, our purpose really was to show that we're as good or better than you. And we can sport material things, but we're into this, and you should be too. And and to some degree it worked.
Remember when
So.
they used to come and ask us to come on to their companies, remember?
Yeah.
Regularly.
I still think I understand what you're saying and I accept it, but I still think, somebody who wanted to could take this verse and say, well, listen, so-and-so, why do you have an aquarium in your house? Why do you have decorative rock formations in your driveway? Why do you have this or that? That's beyond what is required to keep body and soul together, therefore on the strength of
Not necessarily. I mean, human life doesn't mean living in a cell. You should have a garden. I mean, every human needs a garden and a library and things like that. Like if you look at Vedic civilization, they provide green open spaces. The architecture is meant to please the mind. There's vastu involved, so that it actually makes you feel right. And these are necessities. Prabhupada talks about it in the first canto. You have to have jewels. You have to have spices and herbs. I mean, what would our life be without Himalayan pink salt? People sailed across the ocean trying to find that stuff back in the old days because they didn't have anything. So, human life doesn't just mean, the bare necessities don't necessarily mean living in a cell, with no pictures and no plants, and even animals. Humans like animals, and animals like humans. They like to hang out together, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's a natural part of human life to be healthy and have the kinds of things around you that you need. And everybody has a different kind of quota on that too. You also have to, one person judging another may not be very helpful unless the person asked you to consult him and say, you come through and help me clean out the stuff I don't need. And that happens a lot. Like people, they get too much, there's atyahara going on, and they'll even hire somebody to come and say, you don't need all this stuff, you should get rid of it. It's professional organizers do that all the time. People write books about it. But each person has to kind of self-regulate and figure out how much they actually need, so that they're not over-collecting and overburdened by so many things. Imho. Gopal Prabhu?
How to reconcile the Ishavashyam principle versus Atyahara, over-collecting, over-gathering.
That was a question or an answer? It was a question.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck in the middle of that sometimes.
Well, I mean, you should do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and get the kinds of things that you need to live a natural, healthy life. Kamasya nindriya pritir labu jiveta yavatha jivasya tattvajignasya narto yasya karmavi. One should live a healthy life, but only so that you can inquire about the absolute truth. Prabhupada talks about this in the 8th canto too. He says one has to have central strength and balance in one's life in order to inquire about the absolute truth. If you feel depleted, and it's one man's food's another man's poison. Some people, and at certain stages of life, it may be different for each person. At a certain point of life, somebody may feel very natural having nothing and sleeping on the floor, and that makes them joyful. And at other time, they may need a few things because they're in a more creative period. They want a little more control over the energy, and they need a little more space to do that. And then later on in life, when they've dealt with all the energies and they thought, I really don't need anything, it's all internalized, they may then give those things up. And Prabhupada talked about it earlier. He said, even a sannyasi can become attached to the symbols of sannyas. He said it's not as strong as attachment as householders, but still, it's there. And so the main point is to become internally satisfied, joyful.
If this principle that he's talking about isn't accepted, then how are you going to rationalize the fact that among the ever liberated associates of Lord Chaitanya and Krishna, there are kings that live in a more opulent way than we can even imagine, and a person that lives with nothing that we can't imagine? So the main thing is the consciousness. The main thing is the Krishna consciousness. It's not to be judged by, the external. Because you may be a king and you may be a greater devotee than a yogi. Look at Durvasa Muni and Maharaj Ambarish. He was a king and the king of the world. And Durvasa, he was such a great yogi and austere, and he could go anywhere by his mystic power. But, Ambarish defeated him just by standing there, waiting for him to come back, So that's the balance.
I was thinking that anybody who was born in a particular, or grew up in a particular socioeconomic environment, that is natural for him. Maybe for others it's too much. But for him it's natural, and above that would be too much for him.
Do you remember what Prabhupada said when the Americans first came to India with Prabhupada? He kind of chuckled at us and he said, you Americans, wherever you go, you'll end up living in a certain standard of living, wherever you are. He didn't ridicule us and tell us you have to stop that.
That was in the context of on that morning walk, because the devotees pointed out how the people, they had been sublet they had built apartments, the government for the homeless people, and then the homeless people moved out of their apartments and sublet them to others, and then they moved back on the street. And Prabhupada said that's because that's their karma, to live on the street. And he said, just like you Americans, said you come here to Calcutta, but no matter where you go, you still live like Americans, because that's your karma. You're in India, but you don't really touch it. Prabhu?
I was just thinking, just the example of Punjarik Vidyanidhi. You know, when they saw him, they were like, "There's no way he could be a pure devotee, slick hair, opulent living." And then when they started reciting verses from Bhagavatam, he just completely lost it.
Out of spiritual emotion.
Yeah.
I don't think Samya Prash Prabhu is satisfied yet. Let's let him have a follow-up question and then we'll move on.
I'm satisfied by the explanations that contextualize it in terms of bhakti, but as a principle, it seems like this verse is therefore not applicable. Like no one can take this verse and say, now I can judge a situation, because it seems such a subtle thing that basically it comes down to the individual must look at themselves and say, am I actually really, is this atyahara, or is this legitimately what I need because of, like Havi Prabhu said, my socioeconomic status, my karma, my varna and ashram, what I need for my service to keep my mind peaceful. It just seems like that's my only conclusion, is that it's, among other verses here, may not be applicable as a how do I put it? Yeah, it's not a regulatory thing. It's more like an individual thing. Individual. I don't know if I'd use the word arbitrary, but it's highly subjective. It's so subjective that only oneself and one's guides and gurus can actually apply it, I guess, is my only conclusion.
There it is. I think it's a fine conclusion. Where are we now? Besides Govardhan. 9? Starting at 9? One should treat animals such as deer, camels, asses, monkeys, mice, snakes, birds, and flies exactly like one's own son. How little difference there actually is between children and these innocent animals. Purport. One who is in Krishna consciousness understands there is no difference between the animals and the innocent children in one's home. Even in ordinary life, it is our practical experience that a household dog or cat is regarded on the same level as one's children, without any envy. Like children, the unintelligent animals are also sons of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore a Krishna-conscious person, even though a householder, should not discriminate between children and poor animals. Unfortunately, modern society has devised many means for killing animals in different forms of life. For example, in the agricultural fields, there may be many mice, flies, and other creatures that disturb production, and sometimes they are killed by pesticides. In this verse, however, such killing is forbidden. Every living being should be nourished by the food given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Human society should not consider itself the only enjoyer of all the properties of God. Rather, men should understand that all the other animals also have a claim to God's property. In this verse, even the snake is mentioned, indicating that a householder should not be envious even of a snake. If everyone is fully satisfied by eating food that is a gift from the Lord, why should there be envy between one living being and another? In modern days, people are very much inclined toward communistic ideas of society, but we do not think that there can be any better communistic idea than that which is explained in this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Even in the communistic countries, the poor animals are killed without consideration, although they also should have the right to take their allotted food with which to live. Context. Text 10. Even if one is a householder rather than a brahmachari, a sannyasi or a vanaprastha, one should not endeavor very hard for religiosity, economic development, or satisfaction of the senses. Even in householder life, one should be satisfied to maintain body and soul together with whatever is available with minimum endeavor, according to place and time, by the grace of the Lord. One should not engage oneself in ugra karma. Purport: in human life, there are 4 principles to be fulfilled. artha, kama, and moksha. Religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. First, one should be religious, observing various rules and regulations, and one must earn some money for maintenance of his family and the satisfaction of his senses. The most important ceremony for sense gratification is marriage, because sexual intercourse is one of the principal necessities of the material body. Yanmaitu nadi kriyamedi sukham hitucham. Although sexual intercourse in life, both animals and men require some sense gratification because of material propensities. One should be satisfied with married life and not expend energy for extra sense gratification or sex life. As for economic development, the responsibility for this should be entrusted mainly to the Vaishyas and Grihasthas. Human society should be divided into Varnas and Ashramas: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. Economic development is necessary for Grihasthas. Brahmana Grihasthas should be satisfied with a life of adhyayana, adhyapana, yajana, and yajana. Being learned scholars, teaching others to be scholars, learning how to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, and also teaching others how to worship how to worship Lord Vishnu or even the demigods. A Brahmana should do this without remuneration, but he is allowed to accept charity from a person whom he teaches how to be a human being. As for the Kshatriyas, they are supposed to be kings of the land, and the land should be distributed to the Vaishyas for agricultural activities, cow protection, and trade. Shudras must work. Sometimes they should engage in occupational duties as cloth manufacturers, weavers, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, brassmiths, and so on, or else they should engage in hard labor to produce food grains. These are the different occupational duties by which men should earn their livelihood, and in this way human society should be simple. At the present moment, however, everyone is engaged in technological advancement, which is described in Bhagavad Gita as Ugra Karma, extremely severe endeavor. This Ugra Karma is the cause of agitation within the human mind. This Ugra Karma is the cause of agitation within the human mind. Men are engaging in many sinful activities and becoming degraded by opening slaughterhouses, breweries, and cigarette factories, as well as nightclubs and other establishments for sense enjoyment. In this way, they are spoiling their lives. In all of these activities, of course, householders are involved, and therefore it is advised here, with the use of the word api, that even though one is a householder, one should not engage himself in severe hardships. One's means of livelihood should be extremely simple. As for those who are not grihasthas, the brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis, they don't have to do anything but strive for advancement in spiritual life. This means that 3/4 of the entire population should stop sense gratification and simply be engaged in the advancement of Krishna consciousness. Only 1/4 of the population should be grihastha, and that should be according to the laws of restricted sense gratification. The grihasthas, vanaprasthas, brahmacharis, and sannyasis should endeavor together with their total energy to become Krishna conscious. This type of civilization is called Daiva Varnashrama. One of the objectives of the Krishna consciousness movement is to establish this Daiva Varnashrama, but not to encourage so-called Varnashrama without scientifically organized endeavor by human society.
Yes, sir.
Is this proposal practical? The one to divide society in a way that only 1/4 of it would be able to be in this context and also very restricted. Is this something that we will see sometime in history?
Well, you could have a household with 4 people in it. So one person could work and maintain the household, and the rest of the 3 could do spiritual Well, like back in California, we have a house, a special house, and maybe, I hope the landlord's not watching, but we got like 6 people living there. 2 or 3 of them go out and work all day long. They have a professional job, and they make the money. And the rest of them go out and just do preaching and spiritual stuff. So they live in one house, and they divide the labor up. Because some of them, they're already trained to do professional work, and they have the propensity to do it too, and they would like to have a little extra. The other ones are already done with that, or they haven't gotten into it yet, one of the two. There's several on both sides. And so they're not concerned with earning money by having a professional job, and they're free to preach all day. And they coexist quite nicely in one house. So if you could do it in a house, you could do it in a village. And if you could do it in a village, you could do it in a little town. And if you could do it in a town, you could do it in a city. If you could do it in a city, you could do it in the world. Little divisions of, according to their propensity, but it doesn't take much.
Another thing that crossed my mind along the same vein as Javi's point, when we hear 1/4, it doesn't necessarily mean in terms of the gross numbers of human beings, and 1/4 of them are going to be sannyasis, 1/4 of them are going to be this. It's always going to be a vast majority, or bigger number that are going to be grihastas than the other 3. There's only going to be a much smaller number that are going to be brahmanas. So when we hear that number, is that practical? There's going to be 1 billion sannyasis and 1 billion vanaprasthas and 1 billion brahmacharis and 1 billion grihastas. It doesn't work like that. Just another way to look at it.
George Harrison, he did that song. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
Maharaj, what you said is exactly what I was thinking when I read that. So my question is, how do we then take...
Maybe there's hope for me there.
So my question is, how do we understand what Srila Prabhupada is saying? What does he actually mean, if not literally 1 billion sannyasis on the planet?
I have an answer for that. It requires a little intelligence.
Well, you have intelligence. Can you help me understand? Or is it just, it'll come to us in time?
Pack the sweet balls for the right answer.
We don't have any Cupid dolls here, but we have...
Not yet. First answer correctly.
No, the point I'm making is that you're seeing, each one of us is seeing it with a certain level of realization and intelligence or knowledge or ignorance. So we can't expect that everyone's going to understand it in the same way. And also, a person who, as they advance in spiritual life, when they read that, they'll understand more and more and more, the same thing. That's why I'm a promoter of not giving up reading Srila Prabhupada's books. As we heard Prabhupada say a few purports ago, even if you read the whole Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters, every day, you still didn't stop, because every time you read it, you're going to get something new. So it's not that just because a person can't understand that, the first time he reads, or even the second time, or the third time, that he won't be able to understand it in a way that will satisfy him and allow him to apply it into his life and see it in terms of human society with the intelligence that he gets from hearing and chanting and hearing and chanting and hearing and chanting and hearing and chanting from now until forever. Do I get this?
I accept that, but on the basis of that, as somebody who has inferior realization, I would like to know if anybody has greater realization on what Prabhupada actually means by that particular statement, then rather than the
statement again? Point of information, please.
Sure. The statement was the one that Javier Prabhu brought up about.
Recognize the gentleman from Tehran, Iran, in Toronto.
If I'm not mistaken, it's the statement that says that only 1/4 of the population should be grihasta, and that should be according to laws of restricted sense gratification. He didn't actually say that the other 4 are divided exactly in 4, but anyway. So he says only 1/4 of the population should be grihasta. So I just, in my understanding of Vedic history, which is so limited that I submit to everyone else in the room on this, I don't see that ever being the case, except maybe in Satya Yuga, that only 1/4 were grihastas. It just seems difficult for me.
No, I'm just saying that 1/4 doesn't mean divide in 4 equal parts. 1/4 means in terms of varnashrama, there are always 4 varnas and ashramas, so it's always 1/4. So it depends on the specifics of the time, places, circumstances. It's like in many places they are
Don't
given
eat it all at once.
in many places are given some proportions in scriptures, in some purpose. I've seen different examples in certain yugas how the society was divided according to the 4 varnas and ashramas, and during the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga and Satya Yuga it's not the same.
There's only one class in Satya Yuga, Paramahansa.
Yeah,
Right? Well, it goes like
but
divided.
but then the proportion, the ratio between Brahmanas and Kshatriyas is not the same in Treta Yuga and Dvapara Yuga and in Kali Yuga. It's not same ratio.
Correct.
The answer is, it all comes out in the wash. But if you average it all together, then it's going to forth, right?
So that means we've already fulfilled this sentence, because 1/4 of the population who are following Varnashram are grihastas, right? So all we have to do is get everyone to follow Varnashram, and then that's.
I like that answer.
Is that
That's
what we're
good.
saying?
That's a good idea. I think we can all accept that.
Sadhu.
Wait. Oh.
Okay.
the next
I thought it was a serious question. I just.
We finished that?
Yeah.
Okay,
11.
11. Take that little bug thing that's on the, there's an extra one on the shelf there, and plug it in where the dongle is up here.
That's what you're looking for?
Here. I got it here. Unplug the dongle, put that in instead. Brandon, we got it.
Unplug the dongle? Then how will we have our...
Plug the dongle. It'll last for a little while.
Really?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be constantly charged.
Really? It doesn't...
It's got to be charged.
Will it blow up? And if you overcharge it, will it blow up?
Okay, so now we have our
That's what I...
geometry break until 25 after. Go up, Brandon.
I hope it wasn't overly whatever.
We got